As one of comics' most prominent queer creators, his legacy extends beyond the page, inspiring generations of fans to step into their own heroic potential. Phil is also a regular at the Men's Embodiment Circle here in Provincetown, so we'll explore how men's work can help everyday men step into their own heroic potential, to face fears, embrace vulnerability, and find authentic strength off the panel and into real life. Phil, Tim, are you ready to go all in?
I am.
Let's do this.
Yeah, welcome. Here we go.
So, Phil, you're known for illustrating some of the world's most iconic heroes. Could you share how your early fascination with superheroes influenced your artistic path and shaped your own understanding of heroism?
I was an only child of a single parent and a latchkey kid, so I was by myself a lot growing up and from a very young age. And one of the things I did to entertain myself was draw. And one of the things I did a lot, because I was a TV kid, again, because I was by myself, I watched a lot of TV, blah, blah, blah. And it was fascinating because it didn't matter what was on the television. If it was a documentary, if it was a sitcom, if it was a soap opera, but particularly cartoons, which were my favorite, I would recreate them with the reams of paper that my mother would bring home from her office, panel by panel, scene by scene, almost storyboarding the episodes that I'd watched the night before, the day before, whenever I consumed the episode. And it really taught me about storytelling. It taught me about narrative, and it developed a real love for long form. But more than anything, it developed a real love for a cliffhanger. Which is my favorite part of what I do. And it's really my favorite part of narrative generally, is the what happens next component of storytelling. So that actually really impacted my choice of art making, because I chose to dive into storyboards, comics, anything that had anything beyond single illustration, single image narrative. I wanted to tell a long story. And I wanted to tell a story that was perpetual, that never really had an end, but somehow always gripped people, again, with a cliffhanger to make them come back for more.
The thing that's jumping out to me is this idea is you as a young kid watching an episode, and in the story you just told, like watching it at night and remembering it, and then recreating it in the morning and storyboarding it. I'm curious to know, Are you connected to the thing about those stories that made you remember them, the thing about them that stuck with you through the night and maybe through your morning and through school, and landed with you so intensely that you're like, I have to recreate this? Because I feel like that is the essence of something about your passion.
Yes. So of course I was a queer kid, a gay kid, probably without even having language for that, without really even knowing what that meant, but knowing at a very early age, 3 or 4, that I was different from other children, and probably even sensing empathically that my mother was concerned about something. And my mother was actually a really loving and compassionate woman. There was no real attempt to convert me in any way or sort of alter my behavior, but I knew that I was different. And so the material that I was most drawn to was fantastical, otherworldly. It was beyond, I like to say, the mundane world that I lived in. And so that was the material I was most drawn to, and that was the material I chose to replicate. So anything with larger than life characters, anything with grand or epic locations, things that queered the world that I was in. And it should be said, when I talk on panels or when I write academic papers, I use the word queer in its broadest sense, which basically means anti-traditional, anti-patriarchal, sort of defiant of norms, as well as sort of when we talk about sexual orientation or gender expression. So anything that queered the very mundane little world that I was in, that's what I was drawn to. And so again, superheroes, dinosaurs, dragons, soap opera characters, Saturday morning cartoons, even I always like to say like Carl Sagan's Cosmos, right? Which was all about the universe, like, because it was just so much bigger than the world I lived in. And because I knew it was different, I had a drive to escape the world that I was from and find a world that was big enough essentially to handle me.
So what I'm hearing you say is like this idea of differences, and it isn't a new idea that queer people are often drawn to superheroes because they have that shared thing. And you and I have talked about this, full disclosure for the people listening, like Phil and I are very close friends. We've talked about this a lot. You know who my favorite characters are. And I think that when we think about the differences in superheroes, one of the easiest things for us to think about are their superpowers, like the things that make them strong. And I think queer people, I'll speak for myself, moments when I felt weak or alone and wished I could fly away, or wished I could guarantee my protection because I was invincible or invisible or so strong you would, But I am curious about the other parts of superheroes that make them different too, and how that has landed with you. The parts that aren't necessarily their super ability, but the vulnerability that comes along with it, or I don't like to use the word vulnerability there because I think vulnerability is a strength, but like Rogue as an example is one of my favorites. And her incredible capacity also comes with
A cost.
and a challenge. Thank you. Could you speak to that a little bit?
There are 2 or 3 things that come to mind about, I think, the relevance of superheroes to queer people and why we connect with them so often. One is, and I've said this many, many times, I still think it's true, that superheroes are essentially drag queens and vice versa.
You have said that.
Right.
And I love that.
Right.
Yeah.
And the biggest idea being that, again, a normal, I'm going to use the word mundane a lot, I expect, but a perfectly normal person can put on a new uniform, take on a new name, and becomes the person that they really are inside, or take on another persona that has much greater strength and presence in the world than they might in their, again, normal, mundane body. I just like to say that, drag queens, again, they put on a costume, they have a code name, they're superheroes. They become larger than life figures with powers that we can't even imagine. Most of them, the powers are to entertain, but certainly sometimes to enlighten. And I think that's what superheroes do as well, right? So many of our favorite superheroes, Spider-Man's a perfect example. Peter Parker's just this kid from Queens, right? Who ends up with this extraordinary ability and is out there fighting his greatest arch enemies every day while still trying to get through high school and take care of his elderly aunt. And I think a lot of people, but particularly a lot of queer people, can relate to this idea. And I think they long. I think this is still true. I feel like I'm talking from a particular, point of view and an age. And I wonder about queer kids in 2024, 2025, like what it's going to be like for them. Because I do think there's sort of greater visibility and a greater capacity to express. But I really think that is the power of superheroes, is their transformative quality. You start in a kind of a small version of yourself, and then you transform and you become this really grand version of yourself that no one can believe, and that is capable of great and wonderful things.
So I don't want to jump ahead, and so I'm going to pass it back to you in a second, but it feels like you're alluding to this idea that we, people in this world right now, can choose to step into some things. And there's this book called Presence where they practice the Wonder Woman stance. Have you heard of this? Right? And like before a meeting, you can get into this, like spread your feet shoulder width distance, put your hands on your hips, like puff your chest, like, and the effect that it has. When you're talking about drag queens, I feel like the same thing. And I'm thinking about, my friend Johnny, known as Delta Miles here in town, who steps into their persona and then creates magic that isn't just entertaining. Sometimes it is very enlightening. Sometimes it is very illuminating. And the last show that they did really focused on that sort of self-reflection and, personal growth. So it does sound to me like a thing that people can choose if they're aware of it, to be like, oh, I can choose to step into a sense of myself in any given moment. You know, when I'm about to start a meeting or run a men's circle or start a performance or do a podcast or whatever the thing might be. And I think there's real power in that. Did I hear you correctly?
You did. It's funny. I know all about the Wonder Woman stance. They talk about it a lot. I think they actually teach it in sort of corporate environments as well.
Yeah.
But the actually thing I think is really important from Wonder Woman, particularly the Linda Carter TV show, is not the stance, it's the transformation. The thing I would encourage people to do is spin as she did. I know it sounds really absurd because I actually
do it for fun.
I mean, I do too, but like there's nothing I love more in a gay bar than watching like a spliced together kind of YouTube video of like all of Linda Carter's spins from the 3 seasons of the Wonder Woman TV show. And crowds cheer, the gays of a certain age love it. But I think what's really fantastic about it, I think what they're responding to is the transformation itself, right? She's in her street clothes, she spins, there's this flash of light, and suddenly she's Wonder Woman, and then she spins again, and then she's Wonder Woman but in a diving suit, or Wonder Woman in her motorcycle costume, whatever it is. I really think that what people deep down are connecting to is the transformative quality of her.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think this is why we love it when drag queens do reveals. I think it is an example in so many different ways of our capacity to be more than one thing.
Yes.
And like, right, I think that's the human experience. Like, we are capable of being many things. And when we see it represented, you're like, oh, what if I could just spin around and be that? Well, you can.
You can.
You can. You totally can. And so can I. And what we need, and if we bring it back to men's work, or just human work, is we need our friends and our loved ones to remind us, you know, you need to spin and turn into this right now. Mm-hmm. This is like the archetype or the thing that's going to serve you in this moment. And we practice doing that. So,
yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking like as a young kid, like thinking about how I expressed myself. I went through my goth phase, then I went through my super colorful phase, and like what I wore, what I put on in the morning was my armor, right? It was my costume. And so I would like put this on and it would like reshape how I would approach my high school environment. And it really like sent a signal to my own brain and to the world, like, this is who I am today. Right. And so like I do that even today. Like if I'm going out for my motorcycle ride and I've got my leather chaps on and my leather jacket, like I feel like a badass. And if I take a walk through town, like there's a certain strut that comes from it. And like I know that is always within me, that potential is always inside of me, but there's something about the transformation of doing the spin, of like putting on the costume, that really unlocks it in me.
And it's a feeling. So I'm going to tell a quick story where I was, one of my boyfriends who I still adore, his name is Joe Lupo. He is co-founder of Visual Therapy. So if you're looking for fashion or interior design in New York City, you should absolutely look him up. For the 2 years that he and I dated, I never thought fashion mattered. And I was like, whatever. And he obviously thought it did matter. And so I just let him dress me. And also because I was a dancer, used to having like a wardrobe staff, I'd be like, lay it out, I'll put it on. And I always looked great. Anyway, the story I want to tell is he bought me this coat, and I was in Chicago doing the out-of-town tryout of The Pirate Queen, and I wore the coat. I had been wearing this coat every day for probably 2 months. But then one day he had come into town, and I was going to this book signing event. And so I put on the rest of the outfit, and I could feel myself walking differently and like carrying myself differently. And I walked into the theater down the same stairs through like, you know, the whole thing, everything was the same. And people were like, oh my God, Tim, I love your new coat. I love your new coat. You look so good in your new coat. And I remember thinking, I've been wearing this coat for 2 months. Well, like, what is different? What's different is not the coat. What's different is me. And then starting to realize the power that came from the fashion as a choice. And then really the feeling, oh, when I put all this stuff on, I felt differently. Therefore, I walked differently. Therefore, I was seen differently. And that was the moment when I'm like, oh, there is power here.
Right? Yes.
There's real power here.
There's the RuPaul quote, like, we're all born naked and the rest is drag. I firmly believe that. I've had some really interesting conversations primarily with lesbian comic book fans about superhero costumes, and particularly female costumes, which tend to be hypersexualized. But as I'm looking at my boot, the other thing we talk about is heels. And I know I am my most transformed, not if I'm wearing leather, not if I'm wearing a bathing suit, not if I'm wearing a hot jockstrap. It's if I'm wearing a heel on a boot. Because I'm taller. I'm not a tall guy. And so it makes me stand differently. I feel differently. Even the click of the boot on the ground, it's transformative for me. And so I always joke that my favorite comic book character, whenever she's not in heels, she's wrong. Like, you have drawn her incorrectly. She must wear heels.
There's something about that. Like, I'm very similar. Like, I love a good boot with a heel.
Yeah.
So when we go line dancing Wednesday nights with Francis, I love to
At the Gifford House.
At the Gifford House. I love to wear my boots with a heel. And what it does is it actually keeps me more present and grounded. I don't know what about it, like, just like turns my brain on. And something you had mentioned earlier is the power of strength and presence that can come from the costume. And so, like, that for me, that's part of what it is. It gets me out of the judging, comparing, like, self-sabotage mode and into this present moment of, like, and it could be the click of the heel that just keeps me there. It could be how I'm feeling. I don't know exactly what it is, but it does keep me more present. And I think that when we think about men's work, like, that's a big component of it.
Well, I'm gonna pass it back to you for next question, but I do want to just, like, draw our attention to how many times in the movies, maybe specifically in, like, 80s, early 90s movies, where we have that moment where, whether it's like we have a view of the floor or the ceiling, or maybe it's like a blackout into a fade in, where all we hear are the clicking of the shoes, and we immediately know, oh, these are, like, we know what character we're about to see. And I'm thinking now of, like, Secret of My Success or something, where, like, oh, these are what they called the suits, the executives, the CEOs, or whatever. But, like, and those characters presented in a very particular way, and there was that thing about it.
There's a presence.
Yeah, and I feel it too. Like, anytime there's a click to my shoe, which there almost never is, because I'm always in athletic shoes or barefoot, right? Like, the fitness and yoga. So for me, it's even more, because I'm like, oh, I can. Even, like, the hardness of a shoe when I'm wearing, like, and then, just in case people aren't sure about this, I was a former professional dancer, and I can rock a pair of heels pretty hardcore. Hardcore. So, like, there are videos out there if you want proof.
I just wanted to jump in really quickly, just on as we sort of, I think, wrap this topic or move on to something. I remember the first time, God, this would have been 20 years ago, 18. Oh my God, it was 20 years ago. I was in West Hollywood. I went into, like, a gay store, and I had them dress me. I had a budget at the time. I'd made some money off some project, and I wanted someone else to choose my clothes, because I felt like I was making poor choices. And it was amazing. Not only were they thrilled out of their minds, I think because they were probably bored in the store and they were hard selling me.
Yeah.
But I found they put me in things I would never have chosen to wear because I was so conservative, right? And so I know it sounds really, really funny, but bringing this back to men's work and sort of men's growth, men's transformation. I know a lot of men, particularly my age and older, who I don't think would ever do that. I feel like I just had a conversation with someone who's never been dressed by anyone. And I just want to say, like, go do it. Aside from the fact that it's really fun, there's no actual obligation to buy anything. It is amazing to experience something like clothing, which again has this incredible transformational quality on your body, or through the eyes of someone else. Someone's like, you will look great in this. No, I won't. You will look great in this. Trusting that they are correct. And then allowing yourself to put it on. I was transformed after that. It was really amazing. And it was, I think of it as sort of a pivotal moment in my 30s, sort of a growth moment. And I don't know, I would just encourage so many men who don't take care of themselves in the way they should, or who are looking to transform physically. I know it sounds really absurd and highly superficial, but I'm like, go let someone dress you.
No. I want to, like, highlight this, because I think this is part of the messaging that we received. Like, there are things, this is messaging I received. there are things that men are supposed to do and things that men are not supposed to do. And I think that's partly why I was always like, well, fashion doesn't really matter. And so I think the invitation, if I'm hearing you correctly, is there could potentially be a deep somatic, emotional, intellectual experience available to you in things if you are willing to make yourself available to it. And this is when we think about men's work and in men's embodiment circles, a lot of what we're doing is that, right? We're putting ourselves in situations where we are being challenged. So, for example, if there were a man who was going to do what you just described, and I absolutely agree they should do it. I have done it, right? There's probably going to be an edge there to be like, oh shit, like, well, what does this mean? And but as we described earlier, if you can allow yourself to do it, what if you feel different? What if you feel more powerful? What if you feel more confident, more capable? And what if that starts rippling? Mm-hmm. Well, the truth is, we already know if you're feeling it, there will be a ripple. So we're not really asking that question, but like, so how might that influence you and your life? And so this is why RuPaul, we keep going back to RuPaul and drag queens. And he said, you want to be successful, wear a suit. I don't think he says that because suits are inherently like more attractive than other things. I think it's because I'm making a conscious choice in how I present myself. And in that conscious choice will come a feeling that is undeniable sort of energetically. And that feels powerful.
Yeah, it unlocks a strength. Sometimes our external, like how we present ourselves externally, will unlock something within us. Mm-hmm. And something that I heard within the examples of like having somebody dress you is this idea of like being vulnerable, like being exposed and admitting that, hey, I might need a little bit of help and vulnerably standing up for that. And so I'm curious now, like we've talked a lot about like superheroes and the external armor, the external uniform as part of their strength. Like what are some of the other characteristics of superheroes that you find, really interesting?
Pardon me. So I was doing a little bit of research about heroism today because for 35 years, professionally, and then probably for much longer, I've been working with characters, on a team called the Justice League. I've been working with characters who are called superheroes. And so I don't think there's anyone in my business, certainly my peers, that don't contemplate the very notion of heroism, of justice, of fairness. Like these are ideas that we grapple with all the time. In the hopes of telling stories that ask our readers to do the same. And so when I was thinking about today, I wanted to go see, I was looking up Joseph Campbell's definition of heroism. Joseph Campbell, of course, was the really famous mythology expert. And he said, a hero is someone who has devoted their life to something greater than themselves.
Wait, can you just say that one more time? Because that feels really beautiful. And let's all just like let that sink in here. So he said again, tell us. Yeah.
So Joseph Campbell, this expert on world mythology, kind of personal hero of mine, described a hero as someone who has devoted their life to something greater than themselves.
Someone who has devoted their life to something greater than themselves.
Sounds a whole lot like purpose.
It does, although that's there's something else, another definition that came up from a writer that I worked with many, many years ago. And we were talking about the hard choices that some heroes have to make, particularly in fiction, but also in real life. And it stuck with me for 20 years. She said that heroes will often make the pragmatic choice, the practical choice, especially in a no-win situation. They'll make the choice that it's an expression I really hate because the way it's whittled down, but they'll do the thing that has to be done.
Yeah. What's the yoga principle of do the least amount of harm?
So the ahimsa, cause the least amount of harm possible whenever possible.
Right. But I think part of, in this discussion, I think part of it in doing the practical thing was exactly that, doing least amount of harm, but also without consideration to one's own reputation, right? Because sometimes a hero is faced with two no-win situations, and they just have to choose the one that, again, will do least harm.
Well, we saw this at the end of the second Batman movie, the one with Heath Ledger as the Joker, and where the Batman character had to decide, like, even though who was the actor who played Two-Face? Even though, like, he was playing Harvey Dent, he was like a good guy. He was the White Knight for the whole movie until the end when he kind of crumbled, and he had to forego his own reputation and allow himself to be the villain in order for the greater good to happen. And I remember thinking, like, that's a really big sacrifice, because now you're just going to have headlines over and over about what a terrible, awful person you are, when in reality you were doing what you could to stand up. And the only way that works in that story in particular is if no one ever knows. The only way you actually keep going as the hero is if everyone thinks you're the villain. Wow. Can you imagine sitting with that?
I think about that all the time. I do, because I think about choice making over the past decades, and sometimes really bad choices I've made with friends and loved ones, out of, anger, resentment, whatever, or just sort of callous lack of care, and like decidedly anti-heroic behavior, and then the fixing of it comes with maybe not getting credit for it, right? Like, and that's really important, right? It's like, they don't need to know I fixed it. They don't need to know, like, as long as it's better, that's what matters.
Yeah.
And I think that's really, really hard. I know it's certainly hard for me. I think it's hard for a lot of people.
The practice of doing things out of devotion rather than out of ego is major, right? Like, if you can, do something without expectation of of receiving praise or anything else is like a practice in itself, right? I do this with like gift giving a lot of the times. Like, I really have to like when I'm giving something or doing something for somebody, sometimes I have to have a little bit of like a pep talk with myself, where I have to say, like, I am doing this just to be of service to somebody, of just doing it out of devotion, and I'm releasing myself now and releasing this other person of any expectation. So if I give them something, I have no expectations that they're going to give in return. I just want to be of service and do a devotional act, and that's that.
There's a practice in the men's workspace that I've done many times and have witnessed many times, and it has that quality to it, where there are times at the end of this practice where you will choose to outreach and like connect to make amends. But there are times when, with conscious, thoughtful, consideration, you recognize that isn't in the greatest service, and therefore you still do the work that you need to do. And then you don't reach out to that person or say it in a particular way, because the intention is to be of the greatest good rather than potentially cause more harm. So one of those examples, and this is really tricky, you go through a tricky moment with someone, I want to make amends, or I want to like get some clarity or closure or whatever. But if I do not think you are capable of hearing it, and if in hearing it you get more flared up or whatever, then I have to let that not happen. Because then it would just be for me, and that's built in, and it feels a little bit like that hero's choice of, well, no matter how good it would feel for me to make sure that I had said my whole piece, or that people understood me, or they saw me in a certain way, it's like I might have to do the work and then let you see me however you want to see me. And then also, like, let's not argue with the idea that like that could still be really uncomfortable, and be like, sure, like, it's so good that you've done the work, and then you're also allowed to be like, oh, right? Like that feels a certain way, and so it's okay that then men's work. Do you have a space to be like, hey, I did this stuff, and I still feel misunderstood, and you can just sort of like, they'll be like, yeah, brother, I've been there too.
I think the interesting thing I would say actually about heroism, both real and fictional, but also men's work and their link, is this. I think when we talk about heroes, or we even talk about men, I think sometimes we forget that we're talking about human beings, right? Fictional or otherwise. And that human beings are the width and breadth of emotions that is available to us at any given moment is wide and vast, and that we're going to have lots and lots of contradictory thoughts and feelings. And so even when we're doing navigating the world with best intention, doing our best, there are going to be sometimes it's going to feel really shitty. And that's just part of life. And there will be other times that, we will be rewarded in the most grand way. And that's also part of life. But I think one of my experiences, and I think a bit of reticence I've always had towards men's work, and particularly those sorts of deep practices, is a sense, and I think it was not real, it was not fair, that we had to leave our humanity aside, right? That we would go through this work, and that the goal was to somehow, I don't know if shunt is the right word, but place these very human and I think really important emotional experiences somewhere. Like that if we do the men's work, if we do the work, quote unquote, we won't have those feelings anymore. And it felt to me like that expectation was very high, right? That to navigate the world that we live in, and I do like to sort of ground us in this, the world of United States of 2024, to do that work and then not have space to sometimes feel ways that we wouldn't expect because of the work.
Could I ask a question?
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious, like, what are some of those feelings or emotions that you're referring to that you thought that, like, we're going to bring them in here as a way to, like, kind of release them? And not, is it things like anger and like...
No, it's sort of what something that you said was like ego.
Okay.
Right? Like, or just going back to the idea of, well, I'll just use an example because it actually happened to me. Like, I don't tend to give, I love gift giving. It's definitely a love language, but I don't think I expect anything back. It's never my thought process. I'm going to do all this for you, and then I'm going to get something. I just do it because it makes me happy. But I was talking to someone who does do things and then gets really upset when there's no thank you card in the mail. Like, and part of that is because in his head, it's the polite thing to do. I don't think it's necessarily because it's a tit for tat. I think it's sort of an expectation that in this world, we all engage with each other. So if I've done something, a kind thing to do is to acknowledge that. And I don't even expect that. People will acknowledge or they won't.
So I heard you say, like, one of your, like, concerns or misgivings about men's work. And so I want to just clarify that, like, the way that I define men's work and the way that we've defined the men's work is that it is exactly that. It is human work. It is meant to be human work. And it's done in a context where humans with a shared cultural expectation and pressure come to do that work. So the way that I sort of envision it is that we take any struggles that we have with accessing our emotions or expressing our emotions or experiencing our ego or wrestling with our ego. Like, we take all of those things and we bring them into the space, work with them, look at them from different angles, sort of push them and examine them, so that we might then take that into the world. The idea being that, like, sort of like a full-throated honoring of, like, what it means to be a human being, which to me means you do have an ego and you do have emotions and you do get tired. And sometimes you're like fucking like A game and sometimes you're not, and creating tools and a framework in which we can be like, okay, well, how can I bring my full self and engage in that way? And I think most powerfully, especially in those moments, like, do I have the capacity to tell you I can't do anymore? Which I think men struggle with. And then if we idolize superheroes, we might think like, oh, like, I'm supposed to be like this sort of invincible thing, but like, can I use my superpower to tell you, like, I'm at my limit and I need this conversation to continue tomorrow, or I don't know if I'm going to, like, handle it gracefully. Or so to me, I'm curious about what you said, because I think part of what we're trying to do is not deny our ego, but to, like, or our fear or any of these other things we've talked about, but instead be like, how can I have an experience of you without letting you take full control, without letting you be the full driver of my car? And that, in my experience, is a slow, like as I've been doing the work, I feel like I've gained like a little bit more and more control, and like more capacity. And I think that's what like men are looking for. And then we have to consider the context in which, so like I've gained some, and then if you give me 2 times more than I can handle, then I might start to crumble again. So like the sort of evolution of awareness and capacity.
2 quick stories. So one sort of response to that, and I think, again, I think I had this probably unfair idea of what men's work was, and even therapy. And I think part of it is because, as you well know, my emotions are highly accessible to me.
It is so beautiful, listeners.
Thank you.
It's really lovely.
But, and sometimes that also means anger and sadness. It's usually joy. I'd like to believe that, but often other emotions as well. And so I am constantly bombarded, I would say primarily with social media, but also in other spaces, with what I feels like a very male idea about emotion, which is, we don't always have to react to our emotions. It seems to place rational intellectual thought on the top of the mind pyramid.
Which happens a lot.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I have very mixed feelings about this. And part of it is historical, part of it's cultural. But I absolutely understand we don't want to navigate the world like in a constant state of emotional frenzy. Like that does us no good. But this sort of need to constantly rationalize our feelings and again, compartmentalize them or place them below, again, what many would argue is rational thought. I find I don't trust that. An example being in a heated, I'm going to say political situation, and people are saying like, calm down, we just need to sort of talk with each other. Like we have to be able to communicate. When that situation, like heated rhetoric might be the perfectly rational response to whatever the thing is. I think a lot about this, not to make this too heavy, but like acts of political or racial violence, right? Mm-hmm. And when communities are told they need to sort of calm down or sort of wind their emotions down, et cetera, I'm like, no, that anger or that sadness and those outbursts of that are perfectly rational responses to something that's really, really terrible. And they're told constantly to tamp them down because they are out of control, because they don't have, because their emotions have overtaken their rational mind or their rational thought. And so I think in my head, my again, I keep using the word reticence. I don't know if it's quite distrust of this kind of work has been this feeling of like, well, I don't want to tamp down certain feelings because I think they're important responses.
Well, I believe that this work is the antidote to what you're saying. It is the full embrace of the experience. So one of the things we say, like the elevator speech for men's work is to help men get out of their heads and into their bodies. The way that I visualize this, though, I think about all these energy centers. So the head, the heart, the gut, the primal, and like bringing them all together and work together to then make conscious choices. And we've seen so many gurus and important people who were like, anger is a powerful motivator when applied consciously. I believe men's work is the our moment's response to, well, how can I learn to recognize that feeling, learn to work with that feeling, and then learn to make conscious choices in the experience of that feeling in pursuit of like my highest good, my purpose, my integrity, my mission, and use it. I think it was Gandhi who was like used anger to be like, I'm going to create change. Anger not into rage, but anger into action, into purpose, into compassion. And so that is how I envision and why I love, and clearly as I'm talking now, like passionate about men's work, because it's like, no, it's not about shutting anything down. It's about bringing everything online. In our world right now, men are congratulated and rewarded for being completely in their head. And I tell people, We don't want not head, right? We don't want not that energy. We just want that energy in conjunction with all of this other primal stuff, heart, gut, primal, all working together. And when we see men who walk into a room with that, they are powerful.
There's a balance, right? There is a benefit of being able to tap into and allow the emotions to arise and not suppress emotions. And then there is the like bringing on the brain, right? To say like, okay, emotion is arising, right? Like now I'm going to process a little bit, right? And start to like feel into it, because it's like there are beneficial times where like I do want to like be able to have my emotions kind of take over so I can figure out like what's alive inside of me, while also not allowing them to fully take over, right? Like I think like if we bring this back to superheroes, sometimes there are catalysts that can bring people to the brink of doing something damaging or harmful, right? Because there is some sort of motivator or some sort of like thing.
The danger room.
What is it?
The danger room.
Yeah. What is that?
It's an opportunity, like it's a simulation for the superheroes to be in situations without the consequence, so they can practice.
So like an embodiment circle.
Yeah.
No, that's why I brought it up. It's literally a safe container into which they could start to work with their powers, and recognize like when would they get hurt, when would they hurt someone else, like what are the right choices. I mean, you could speak to the danger room probably more fully than I can, but it does feel like an embodiment circle.
Yeah, and I think that's what I was getting at, is that like I fully believe that like my emotions can and should be alive, but how can I use them without going into a full reaction?
When I was working on a book called Wonder Woman Historia, which is a big retelling of Wonder Woman's origins and the origins of her people, it was written by a woman named Kelly Sue DeConnick, and who's just a brilliant comic book and TV writer and one of my favorite people. And we had really long conversations about the origins of the Amazons, Wonder Woman's people, who were born in the comics. The basic origin story is that the Greek goddesses 2,000 years ago created this tribe of warrior women to help counter the crimes of men against women that were allowed to continue, that were perpetuated by the male gods led by Zeus. And Kelly Sue reimagined them in this new version as a revenge force. And we had really long conversations about righteous anger and vengeance, and they felt very different coming from her. I felt like I learned a lot more about her, particularly when she was talking about the righteous anger of women. And it made me completely reevaluate that emotion, which I've always had a really hard time with. And hilariously, and I don't think I'm overstepping bounds, by saying her husband and son have very difficult time. They don't know what to do with anger. Meanwhile, she and her daughter love it. They thrive on it. They use it because they see it as righteous. And because usually what makes them angry is injustice. It's things that seem unfair to them, right? So it's not like the dishes aren't done, I'm outraged. It is that this terrible thing is happening in the world, and nobody is doing anything about it, or what is being done about it seems unjust or unfair, and therefore I'm angry. And it was so helpful to have that perspective. And particularly, again, this story was really about the war between men and women, which is, thousands of years old, and the way women have been treated historically, and her anger over that was a driver for this incredibly beautiful story that was ultimately about transformation, that was about taking this tribe of women from anger into something else.
Yeah. And I love that, because it really like highlights that like all emotions are valid, right? These are valid emotions. But in your example, you talked about like there's like justified anger and then almost unjustified anger of like, I'm so angry because the dishes aren't done, right? I'm in an emotional reaction and I might be projecting that onto somebody, right? So that's where I think that there's a balance, right, of emotions, where like, how do we not get swept up into our emotions overpowering us? How do we tap into our own power, though, to kind of work with our emotions so that we can, experience a sink full of dishes that may, yes, validly cause a little bit of anger, but working with it so that I don't fly off the handle, right? And start yelling at my kids or my loved one for like not doing what I wanted them to do.
Can I just jump in and ask,
Yes.
like, so would your capacity to work with expectations be one of your real world superpowers? I think the answer is clear to me. It feels like a yes to me. Eric, what do you think?
That's what I was going to say. Is that like, Phil, you've got a lot of superpowers over there, but like the detachment from expectations, I think, is a legit power.
It's a yogic practice, and they used to talk about the yogis as superheroes, attaining these abilities. And I think that's the takeaway for today's episode, if we have any, is that it can be flashy to fly or to lift, a truck over your head or whatever. But some of these capacities, if brought into our life, can create the space into which we can bring love and joy and connection. And it sounds to me like when you're talking about expectations, as an example, it's allowing you freedom and space into which you can make conscious choices. And even looking at your face, and obviously you and I are friends, we've talked about this many times, I know that it is serving you. It is why you continue to practice it. How many other superpowers are there available to us that we just maybe don't think of in that way because it's not flashy?
Vulnerability, empathy, integrity,
patience, clear communication,
presence.
Yeah.
But I would actually even go back to, and again, I'm going to get teary, but I think about this all the time. When I say like exalt and joy, I mean it. I think a lot. We live in a really hard world. And we live in a hard world. But there are moments around us, at least in my life, there are people, moments, places, experiences that provide me with joy every day. And to not recognize those actually feels like a crime. If we're talking about heroes and villains, right? To not recognize the extraordinary opportunities that have been presented to me, the extraordinary men that I have met in my life, particularly here, the kind of crazy career that I have, which I worked for, it was handed to me, but I worked really hard for it. But still, there are a million people. I would say that there are 8 billion people on the planet, and yet somehow I'm one of the few lucky ones who gets to tell stories for a living. Like, I got to live my dream. So few people get that opportunity. And so, it feels like a crime. It feels like an injustice not to practice joy with intent every day.
So that is, and maybe this is where we wrap up. This is like such a fundamental yogic teaching. The teaching of yoga, as I understand it through my teachers, was this pursuit and this understanding that available to all of us is limitless, boundless joy. Limitless, boundless joy. That's what my teachers in the teachings would speak about. It wasn't occasional bursts of pleasure or, it was limitless, boundless joy. But in there was a practice of, it's what you're saying, like practicing that joy, practicing the recognition of the joy, the appreciation of the joy, the cultivation of the joy. And I would have to imagine like much sharing of the joy, right? And so it feels like you're giving like a deep yogic teaching about this idea of joy as a fundamental ingredient in any of our personal growth and spiritual path, because it isn't just the reward. The yogis argue it is part of the path to that reward. And so, I say this a lot in yoga classes, like one of the few sutras in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras about the practice of asana is sthira sukham asanam. Our connection to the earth should be steady and joyful. And so I tell people, because the people get into like serious yoga face, like and I'll be like, you guys, we're allowed to have fun, we're allowed to play. Like if you, one of the rules I have in my yoga classes is if you fall, you have to smile or laugh. because I'm like, yeah, you're doing airplane pose.
I laugh a lot.
Yeah, Warrior 3. You're like, but I think like, so it can seem fun and playful and light and accepting. It is also, as you just beautifully stated, deep and profound. You'd be like, that's the essence of what it is we're doing. And so it sounds like what you're doing is deeply appreciating and savoring those moments. And for that reason, I've never said this to you, but I've always thought of you as a teacher to me in some ways because of how you navigate this world and how emotionally and open and joyfully you seem to do it, and how much I want to be able to do even half of what you seem to be able to do in that way, to bring half the amount of heart you bring, or to taste and savor half the amount of joy you seem to be able to do. So thank you for teaching me. Thank you for leading by example. I think it is one of the most important and powerful teachings of yoga. And I think it's also one that we don't talk about enough because we think it has to be hard work. Right. It's got to look serious. Even if you're on the mountaintop, you got to have the right robes on, and and it's like, or maybe I could just be really, really delighted right now.
One thing that I do owe in terms of lineage is I was really, really lucky to have met several straight men at really important, integral times of my youth who chose to protect and mentor me. The head of my department, who was amazing and so hard on me. He was so hard because he knew that I could do it with the right push and that I'd never been pushed before in a way that I needed to be. He knew that if pushed properly, I could become anything I wanted. And that's a sort of energy. So when I teach with the energy of those men, very, very specifically, because I want others to feel the way I did. It's why I'm not afraid to push. Even now when universities tell us don't push because the students are so fragile, I'm like, trust me, they will appreciate this so much more than if we don't. But again, it's just going back to the conversation of lineage. These men, if they knew it or not, changed my life.
Well, you're talking about these sort of male mentor figures, sometimes referred to as the father figure, although that father figure could be your father.
Absolutely.
But it could also be these teachers or coaches or whatever. And I think what you're talking about is there is a need for more of that across the board. Like all men need strong mentors in these figures to help them. And in men's work, we often say steel sharpens steel. We need each other. And it can come in really sharp if it comes in with heart. So we go back to it can't just be sharp. It has to be sharp and heartful. And the power that has. And then I think what you're also talking about is if it was not available or not as available as it needed to be for men in general, how was it available for queer men? And, my own experience, most of my protection and mentorship came from women. I did not have a lot of men stepping up and protecting me. And I probably would have benefited if I had that. So yes, I think honoring any person who was able to look past any particular label or thing and just see a human being with potential. And then, what you said that I really responded to was that pushing and that sharpness. I remember there was some of these ballet teachers and they loved me, but they were fucking intense. I remember Jolinda. Oh, she was I loved her so much. If she's listening, you were incredible. Thank you. Where she would be like, bend your plie more, jump higher, plie more, jump. But what it created was, I remember the moment when she was like, all right, class, everyone stop. We're going to watch Tim do this because he's doing it correctly. I did not get a ribbon. I did not get a certificate. I did not get a bonus or a Starbucks card. I didn't get anything. I walked out of that room on cloud, what is beyond 9? I was fucking floating because I knew that satisfying this person who had a high standard and who wanted me to be my best, there was nothing better than that. And I feel like that's what I'm hearing with you too. And that's what I want. Like, I think that's what men's workspaces now are trying to create, places where we can have mentorship, whether it's from an older man or from colleagues, so that we can get that support that we really thrive in and that benefits everybody. It's got to be heartful. You can't. So they call something called in the men's workspace, they call it being the sacred dick. Yeah. And like, we have a different episode about a different kind of sacred dick. But in this conversation, sacred dick is, you can't just be a dick. You can't just be an asshole.
Right.
You can come in really sharp, but if it's heartful and in service to the greater good, then you have fulfilled the purpose of being the sacred dick, and everyone gets it. And I've done that a few times to be like, we're running over time and we're out of integrity. But I wasn't being an asshole. I was being that thing, and from that thing, growth. So I love honoring the lineage of those men that you talked about, because what I'm hearing you say is, you are the person you are. You've grown into the person you are because of them.
So my first boyfriend, and again, the head of my department, they were definitely sacred dicks. And when but what was really terrific, and it's how I teach, it's how I learned to teach, was they were really hard, but when you did it right, like as you were just describing, like this, like they were celebratory, like they were like excited.
They wanted you to succeed.
Yeah. And you could feel it. Like it emanated from them, and they were thrilled, because they're like, yes, that's it. And I have taught that way for 20 years. And all my students know it. They sort of, one of my favorite moments was teaching a student. I was teaching the class, and they were just being really, really resistant. So I went into sort of sacred dick mode. And I remember there was one student, her name was Lydia, and like her eyes started to change. I remember her physical countenance change when she realized what I was doing. I was being a jerk because I wanted certain results from them that I knew they were capable of giving. But just for whatever that day, they were resistant, tired, didn't want to, not interested. And her face changed. And I remember her smile. She was beaming when she figured out what I was doing, and her work changed while we were doing it. It was just like, that's Jack. Like, that's Neil. Like, those are my guys coming through doing to you what he did to me. Because I remember being so enraged when I remember the head of my department, Jack Endewalt, would be like, so you're going to fail this class. You know that, right? And like, he was dead serious. It was not a threat. He's like, you're doing so poorly. You think you're so much better than you are. You only have to do these 3 things and you will succeed. And I went, oh God, I remember going back to my dorm room fuming. I was like, fuck you, Jack. And but I'll prove it to you. I did exactly what he told me to do. Of course, he was 100% correct. And I brought in the work. It's like, see? And like, he was thrilled because he got exactly what he wanted out of me, because he knew it was the best thing for me.
You know, in the dance world, the worst thing that can happen, or at least when I was training, is that the teacher, the choreographer, they ignore you. So like that's really the thing, to be like, if I'm telling you to turn your leg out, point your foot more, like get your leg higher, jump higher, like I'm looking at you. It's for you. There's a point at which they're like, if you don't want to do it, there's a room full of other dancers who will do whatever I tell them, and we're going to have a great show. So there's that moment of like, and I've been there too, to be like, oh, because you want it just to be great, and like you have to integrate the information, but ultimately like, well, you're only telling me because you actually want me to be the best, because the alternative is you just don't tell me, and then someone else is the best. And you know, it's so on some level, you're like, even if it feels harsh, you're like, you're actually giving me so much love.
So much love,
purely by paying attention to me when there are 30 other people here and you could be talking about their foot. And you're talking about mine. as the dancer perspective. But it's like, it really is such an honor. Yeah, such an honor.
Yeah, to receive compassion, right? Compassionate care from somebody is an honor. And I've really just like, this episode has been really beautiful to witness you guys. Like,
I'm having so much fun.
yeah,
Phil, I'm having such a good time.
like I'm learning so much just by hearing about your own journeys and your experiences and your stories. And on that note, thank you both for sharing in this space tonight, for creating so many spaces in this world for young queer men and people of all orientations and natures to really experience your teachings, your lineages, your joys. So I wanted to thank you for this space today. We covered a lot of ground. We were able to really look at superheroes, both their external appearance and the costumes and the armors that they wear, as well as the internal characteristics and values that they have, and really being able to look at that and see how we can learn from that and be inspired by that to become our own real life superheroes. And I am so grateful and honored to be sitting here in the presence of two incredible heroes of mine. So thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, Phil, thank you so much. Are you feeling complete?
I have one thing to say.
Please. Donna
Troy should always wear heels. Now I'm complete.
Now you're complete. And Eric, do you feel complete?
I also think that I should always be wearing heels. So with that, I'm going to take that as a no, and I feel very complete.
Okay. So let's take a moment now to close our eyes and just take this opportunity with deep appreciation and gratitude for this sacred space and conversation that we've had, hoping that insight, awareness, delight, exuberant joy have all come from this experience. With these words, our container is open but not broken. Aho.
Oh.
Thank you so much for joining us here in the circle. If you'd like to stay connected to us between episodes, please follow us on Instagram at Queer Men's Embodiment. Like, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you find podcasts. And as we leave, now I wish you brotherhood, connection, authenticity, vulnerability, safety, and love. And with these words, our container is open but not broken. Aho.